They laughed when she stepped onto the shooting range with that broken rifle. The mocking whispers and sideways glances cut through the air like bullets, but not as precisely as what was about to follow. Nobody expected what happened next, least of all the seasoned veterans who'd been dismissing her for years. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning air like a drill sergeant's whistle, silencing the chatter across Fort Benning's rifle range. His broad shoulders squared as he pointed directly at Rachel Thompson, the maintenance clerk who had dared to step onto hallowed ground. "What the hell is maintenance doing on my range?" Marcus bellowed, drawing the attention of 24 rangers who turned as one to stare at the small woman clutching what barely resembled a military weapon. Rachel stood motionless, her M4 carbine a sorry sight against the pristine equipment surrounding her. Duct tape wrapped around the stock in uneven strips, rust bloomed along the barrel, and the sight appeared to be held together with what looked like paper clips and determination. Sergeant Madison Hayes stepped forward, phone already raised to capture the moment. "Is that even a rifle anymore?" she asked, zooming in on Rachel's trembling hands. "Or did you pull it from the trash compactor this morning?" Laughter rippled through the assembled soldiers. A few pulled out their own devices, eager to document what promised to be prime social media material. The maintenance clerk in faded coveralls, standing among Fort Benning's elite with a weapon that belonged in a scrap heap, was too perfect an opportunity to miss. "That thing's more likely to explode than fire," someone called out from the back. Rachel didn't respond to the taunts. Her eyes remained fixed on the firing line ahead, as if the crowd had disappeared entirely. Her hands shook visibly, a tremor that ran from her fingertips up her wrists, making the rifle quiver slightly in her grip. Yet beneath the trembling, Range Officer Williams noticed something the others missed: the way she adjusted her stance, the practiced motion as she checked the chamber, the unconscious precision with which her index finger rested alongside the trigger guard rather than on the trigger itself. "You're in the wrong place," Marcus said, stepping closer, towering over her slight frame. "This competition is for warriors, not people who fix broken toilets." More laughter followed, but Williams found himself studying her face. The maintenance clerk's expression remained neutral, almost eerily calm, despite the ridicule. Her trembling hands continued their methodical check of the battered weapon, each movement betraying years of muscle memory that seemed entirely at odds with her maintenance uniform. "Maybe she thinks shooting is like plunging a clogged drain," Hayes added, panning her phone across the gathering crowd of amused spectators. Williams stepped forward, clipboard in hand. Something about the woman's quiet confidence made him uneasy. The tremor in her hands was unmistakable. Yet the way she handled that broken rifle spoke of skills no ordinary maintenance worker should possess. Fort Benning's annual marksmanship competition was the highlight of the training calendar. Soldiers from every division had gathered at the range, their excitement palpable as they anticipated watching the Rangers showcase their legendary skills. The bleachers were packed with spectators, recruits eager to witness excellence, officers evaluating talent, and veterans reminiscing about their own glory days. But the buzz of conversation suddenly shifted when Rachel Thompson stepped onto the firing line. Her maintenance coveralls stood in stark contrast to the combat uniforms surrounding her. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd, quickly evolving into outright laughter. "Is maintenance fixing the targets now?" someone called out, triggering a wave of chuckles. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez stood with his arms crossed. His rangers clustered around him like a pack of wolves. "This isn't a joke competition," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Some of us actually train for this." Madison Hayes pulled out her smartphone, aiming it directly at Rachel. "This is going viral for sure," the sergeant said with a smirk. "Maintenance clerk versus elite rangers? Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for the janitor." The maintenance worker kept her eyes forward, seemingly deaf to the mockery. Despite her shaking hands, Rachel's stance as she knelt to retrieve the ammunition was textbook perfect, the kind of muscle memory that came from thousands of repetitions. Her breathing remained controlled and even, her eyes calm despite the humiliation raining down on her. $10 says she doesn't hit the paper, a young private wagered. 20 says she shoots the wrong target, another countered. Elena Rodriguez, a new recruit standing at the edge of the crowd, frowned at the treatment, but remained silent, unwilling to draw the ranger's attention to herself. As Rachel finished her preparations, the trembling in her hands continued, yet there was something in her composure that seemed almost deliberate, as if the shaking was merely a costume she wore. Her eyes, when they briefly scanned the crowd, held none of the anxiety or embarrassment one might expect. Instead, they reflected a patience born of enduring far worse than mockery. What the laughing soldiers couldn't know was that those trembling hands had once been steady in places where a single mistake meant death. The woman they mocked had survived horrors that would break the strongest among them, forged in fires they couldn't imagine. 4:30 in the morning at Fort Benning came with a stillness that most soldiers never experienced. Rachel Thompson had been awake for 17 minutes already, following the same meticulous routine she'd established 3 months ago when she'd been transferred to the maintenance division. The fluorescent light in her small bathroom cast harsh shadows as she steadied herself against the sink. Her reflection showed dark circles beneath determined eyes. The tremor in her right hand intensified as she reached for her toothbrush, a daily reminder of the neurological damage that had changed everything. Simple tasks became complex equations of timing and balance. "Breathe through it," she whispered to herself, a mantra repeated countless times since the incident. After her shower, Rachel methodically dressed in her maintenance coveralls, each button a challenge that required complete concentration. The clock read 4:42 when she reached for the orange prescription bottle on her nightstand. The experimental nerve medication cost more per month than most junior enlisted made in 2 weeks. She swallowed the bitter pill dry, knowing it would only dull the symptoms, never cure them. At 4:55, Rachel slipped out of her quarters and made her way across the sleeping base. The maintenance shop was dark and empty, exactly how she preferred it. Using her access card, she entered silently and headed straight for the disposal bin in the back corner. There it was, just where she'd left it yesterday, the condemned M4 carbine that everyone else had written off as junk. The rifle's barrel was visibly warped, its stock held together with layers of duct tape, and rust had claimed portions of its surface. To most, it was garbage waiting to be processed. To Rachel, it was something else entirely. With practiced movements, she retrieved the weapon and carried it to her workstation. Her trembling hands steadied slightly as she began breaking down the rifle with the ritualistic precision of someone who had each component was cleaned, inspected, and tested with a focus that transcended her physical limitations. No one at Fort Benning knew that these morning sessions weren't just about salvaging a broken weapon. They were about reclaiming something of herself, something that had been shattered alongside her nervous system. As the maintenance clerk worked in solitude, her movements betrayed years of muscle memory that had nothing to do with fixing equipment and everything to do with the classified gaps in her service record. By 6:30, when the first of her coworkers would arrive, Rachel Thompson would be just another maintenance clerk with shaking hands. But for now, in the pre-dawn quiet, she was something else entirely. The weight of 200 pairs of eyes pressed down on Rachel Thompson as she stood at the firing lane, her damaged M4 carbine clutched in visibly trembling hands. The crowd's whispers and snickers rolled across the range like distant gunfire. Rangers, recruits, and officers alike had gathered for the annual marksmanship competition, and now they'd found unexpected entertainment in the maintenance clerk who dared to challenge their elite. Rachel didn't mind. Being underestimated was a tactical advantage she'd learned to wield as effectively as any weapon. Let them see the shaking hands. Let them mock the duct tape holding her rifle together. Let them believe exactly what they wanted to believe. This is a safety violation, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez announced loudly, stepping forward with the confidence of someone used to having his authority unchallenged. Range Officer Williams, you can't possibly allow this civilian to participate with that piece of junk. The crowd murmured in agreement. Madison Hayes, positioned near the front, raised her smartphone higher, eager to capture every moment of the anticipated humiliation. Williams approached with a frown creasing his weathered face. Thompson, I'm inclined to agree. That weapon looks... Section 7.2 of the competition guidelines, Rachel interrupted quietly, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Any serviceable weapon meeting base regulations is permitted, regardless of cosmetic condition. The range officer's eyebrows rose slightly. You've read the rulebook. Cover to cover, she replied, meeting his gaze without blinking. Marcus stepped closer, towering over her small frame. This is ridiculous. She'll embarrass herself and waste everyone's time. The rules are clear, Staff Sergeant, Williams said after a moment's consideration. If the weapon functions safely, she can compete. A collective groan rippled through the spectators. Several Rangers exchanged amused glances, already placing bets on how quickly she'd fail. Elena Rodriguez, standing at the back of the crowd, watched with concerned eyes, the only person not joining in the mockery. Rachel turned away from the commotion and began her pre-competition checks. Despite her constant tremor, her movements with the weapon were surprisingly fluid. She field-stripped the rifle with practiced efficiency, inspected each component, and reassembled it in under 2 minutes. Williams noticed this contradiction. The shaking hands that somehow performed weapon manipulation with uncanny precision, but said nothing. The crowd saw only what they expected. A maintenance worker out of her depth, setting herself up for public humiliation. As Rachel loaded her first magazine, she caught Marcus staring at her with undisguised contempt. She held his gaze for 3 heartbeats before returning her attention to her preparations. The competition would begin soon, and she had a point to make. Range Officer Williams circled Rachel Thompson's rifle with growing concern, his brow furrowing deeper with each defect he discovered. The M4 carbine was in shocking condition, its barrel visibly warped, the stock held together with layers of faded duct tape, and the trigger assembly displaying an alarming amount of play when tested. This weapon is non-serviceable, Williams declared firmly, holding the rifle as if it might disintegrate in his hands. I can't allow this on my range. It's a safety hazard to you and everyone else. The crowd of spectators murmured in agreement, several Rangers nodding with smug satisfaction. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez crossed his arms, a victorious smile spreading across his face. Section 4.3.2, Rachel replied quietly, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Competition rules state that any military-issue weapon is permitted, regardless of condition, provided the competitor accepts full liability for any malfunction. Williams blinked, momentarily stunned. You've memorized the competition rulebook? Only the parts that matter today, she answered, extending her hand to reclaim her battered rifle. The range officer hesitated, clearly torn between safety protocols and the letter of the regulation. He flipped through his clipboard, finding the exact paragraph Rachel had cited. She's right, he admitted reluctantly, though I strongly advise against this. Marcus stepped forward, towering over Rachel's small frame. This is ridiculous. She's making a mockery of this competition. His voice dropped to a threatening whisper. Stand down, maintenance. This isn't your place. Rachel didn't flinch as the staff sergeant invaded her personal space. Her eyes remained locked on his, unfazed by his physical intimidation tactics. The maintenance clerk's composure was unsettling. Her body might tremble, but her gaze was unnervingly steady. The rules are clear, she stated flatly. Unless you're suggesting the Rangers need special accommodations to compete against a clerk with a broken rifle? A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Marcus's face darkened with anger as he realized the trap. Pushing further would only make him appear insecure. Williams cleared his throat. Competitor Thompson has cited the correct regulation. She'll be permitted to continue under Section 432. He handed back the weapon. For the record, I've noted my safety concerns. Rachel accepted the rifle, her fingers wrapping around it with surprising familiarity despite their visible tremor. The assembled shooters exchanged glances, some amused, others curious about the small woman's unexpected knowledge of competition minutiae. As she moved toward her assigned lane, Madison Hayes snickered to her fellow Rangers. "This will be over in 30 seconds. Hope someone's recording when that thing blows up in her face. But hey everyone, you're watching live from Fort Benning's annual competition," Sergeant Madison Hayes announced, holding her smartphone at arm's length to capture both herself and Rachel in frame. "We've got something special today. Maintenance trying to play soldier." The Rangers behind her erupted in laughter as Madison adjusted the angle to better showcase Rachel's trembling hands. "Check out that wrist contraption," Marcus said, pointing at the device strapped to Rachel's arm. "What's that supposed to be? Training wheels for your trigger finger?" The maintenance clerk remained silent, adjusting the military-grade stabilization brace with practiced precision. What the jeering crowd didn't realize was that the device represented cutting-edge military technology. Originally developed for combat surgeons operating under extreme conditions, the nerve stabilization system had been adapted for veterans suffering from severe neurological damage. Each micro-adjustment Rachel made to the calibration spoke of intimate familiarity with its function. $10 says she can't even load the magazine properly," one of the Rangers called out, prompting another round of laughter. Madison zoomed in on Rachel's hands. "This is going viral for sure. Hashtag epic fail incoming." She panned to capture the reactions of her fellow Rangers, all confident in their assessment of the small woman's imminent humiliation. Private Elena Rodriguez watched from the sidelines, visibly uncomfortable with the treatment Rachel was receiving, but too new to speak against the established hierarchy. She caught Rachel's eye briefly, offering a sympathetic glance before looking away. "That broken piece of junk, plus those shaky hands, equals the best entertainment we've had all year," Marcus announced, gesturing toward the battered M4 carbine. He picked up a piece of loose duct tape hanging from the stock and flicked it dismissively. "This belongs in the trash, just like your chances of hitting anything today." Rachel absorbed each insult without visible reaction, her focus remaining on her equipment and preparation. The tremor in her hands was pronounced as she methodically arranged her shooting mat, but there was a rhythm to her movements that suggested something beyond mere nervousness. Master Sergeant John Harrison observed from the observation deck, his experienced eyes narrowing slightly as he watched her preparations. Something about her methodical approach seemed familiar to him, though he couldn't quite place it. The range officer, too, had noticed inconsistencies between Rachel's apparent inexperience and certain aspects of her behavior, but he remained professionally neutral as the mockery continued to escalate around the determined maintenance clerk. "Lanes 1 through 20, prepare for assignment," Range Officer Williams announced, his voice carrying across the competition area. The crowd of 200 spectators shifted in anticipation as competitors moved toward their designated positions. Rachel Thompson stepped forward toward Lane 7, only to find Marcus Rodriguez deliberately blocking her path. The staff sergeant planted himself firmly, his broad shoulders creating an immovable barrier. "Elite shooters get priority lanes," Marcus declared loudly enough for nearby competitors to hear. "Maintenance clerks can take what's left after real soldiers are positioned." Rachel looked up at him, her trembling hands contrasting with the steadiness in her voice. Competition Regulation 3.4 clearly states lane assignments are first come, first served, regardless of rank or division. Her quiet correction hung in the air between them, precise and unyielding. Several Rangers snickered, but a few veteran observers exchanged glances. The maintenance clerk's knowledge of competition protocols was unexpectedly thorough. Marcus's jaw tightened. You memorize the rulebook? That won't help you hit targets with that piece of junk. He reluctantly stepped aside, deliberately knocking Rachel's ammunition box from her hands as he passed. Brass rounds scattered across the ground, rolling in all directions. Oops, he said with mock concern. Guess your hands aren't steady enough to hold onto your ammo either. From 2 lanes down, Private Elena Rodriguez broke ranks and knelt to help gather the scattered rounds. The young recruit's face flushed with embarrassment on Rachel's behalf. You don't need to do this alone, Elena whispered, scooping up bullets. Sergeant Madison Hayes noticed the interaction and nudged her fellow Rangers. Look, the newbie's making friends with the cripple. Isn't that precious? She raised her smartphone, capturing the moment for her livestream. This is going viral for sure. Elena's shoulders hunched under the sudden attention, but Rachel touched her arm lightly. Thank you, Private Rodriguez, she said, her voice calm despite the tremor in her fingers. But I can manage. Rachel methodically collected each round, her movements economical and precise. She checked each bullet before replacing it in the magazine, fingers working with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that a single misaligned round could mean life or death. The Rangers continued their commentary, but several older veterans watched with growing interest. Rachel's inspection routine wasn't standard range procedure. It was battlefield protocol, the kind developed by soldiers who'd learned harsh lessons about equipment failure under fire. As she loaded her final magazine, Rachel's eyes briefly swept the range, calculating distances, noting wind flags, mentally mapping every variable that might affect her shots. The tremor in her hands might have been visible to all, but the tactical assessment in her gaze went unnoticed by almost everyone present. From the observation deck overlooking Fort Benning's rifle range, Master Sergeant John Harrison leaned against the railing, his weathered eyes narrowing as he studied the competitors below. While most of his attention should have been on the Rangers preparing their equipment, he found himself drawn to the small figure in maintenance coveralls at the end of the line. Rachel Thompson's hands trembled visibly as she arranged her shooting mat with methodical precision. Yet Harrison noted something in her movements that struck a familiar chord. The economy of motion, the careful positioning of her body relative to her weapon. These weren't the actions of a maintenance clerk who occasionally fired a weapon for qualification. They were the unconscious habits of someone who had depended on a rifle for survival. Interesting subject you're watching, remarked Colonel Robert Patterson, appearing silently beside Harrison. The newly arrived officer carried a thin folder stamped with security classifications. Harrison nodded slightly. Something about her doesn't add up, sir. I thought the same thing when I reviewed her transfer paperwork, Patterson replied, his voice low. Her service record has more black ink than text. Maintenance clerks don't typically have files that require presidential clearance to fully access. Below them, Rachel continued her preparations, seemingly oblivious to the stares and whispers around her. She placed each round of ammunition in precise rows, her fingers dancing through what appeared to be a personal ritual before competition. Look at her breathing pattern, Harrison murmured. Controlled 4-count. That's not standard training. Several veterans in the crowd had also taken notice. A retired sergeant major whispered to his companion, pointing subtly toward Rachel's position. A major from Special Operations Command stopped mid-conversation, his eyes tracking her movements with growing curiosity. Patterson flipped through the redacted pages in his folder. Transfer from Walter Reed 3 months ago. Medical discharge recommended, but overruled by someone high up. Extensive neurological damage from... Well, that part's completely blacked out. Rachel finished her preparation and sat back on her heels, her trembling hands now resting on her thighs. For just a moment, her eyes flicked upward toward the observation deck, meeting Harrison's gaze with unexpected intensity before returning to her battered rifle. The first round starts in 5 minutes, Harrison said. I think we're about to see something unexpected. Patterson closed the folder. I've requested her complete file. Whatever's in her past, it's enough to make generals nervous. The competition announcer called for shooters to prepare, and the atmosphere on the range shifted from casual to focused. But the whispers continued to spread through the crowd, as more experienced eyes recognized the disconnect between Rachel's appearance and her actions. The first seeds of doubt and intrigue taking root. The electronic buzzer sounded across the range, signaling the start of the first round. 10 shots and 100 meters, 2 minutes on the clock. The Rangers took their positions with practiced efficiency, their movements fluid and confident. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez fired first, his grouping tight and professional. His squad followed suit, each shooter demonstrating the precision expected of Fort Benning's elite. Sergeant Madison Hayes glanced back with a smirk, still live-streaming the event from her smartphone. Rachel Thompson remained motionless at her lane, the broken M4 carbine resting before her. Her hands trembled visibly as she waited, drawing snickers from nearby competitors. The maintenance clerk seemed frozen, her eyes fixed downrange. "Clock's ticking," Williams called out, his voice carrying across the firing line. Only then did Rachel move. She settled into position with a deliberate calm that contrasted sharply with her shaking limbs. The tremors in her hands seemed to vanish the moment she wrapped her finger around the trigger, a transformation so subtle that only Range Officer Williams and Master Sergeant Harrison noticed from his observation post. Rachel's eyes narrowed, scanning invisible patterns in the air. She assessed the wind by watching the distant grass bend, calculating drift factors that most shooters would need specialized equipment to measure. The military-grade wrist brace stabilized her arm just enough as she exhaled slowly. Her first shot cracked through the morning air. Through binoculars, Williams confirmed a perfect center hit. The crowd's murmurs quieted slightly. Her second shot followed, then a third. Each bullet threaded through the same hole, enlarging it only fractionally. By her fifth shot, the center of the target displayed a single ragged perforation where 5 separate bullets had passed. "Impossible," whispered Elena Rodriguez, the young private standing nearby. The Rangers stopped their own shooting to watch. Rachel continued her methodical pace. Breathe, adjust, squeeze. Each shot perfectly timed between her tremors. The damaged rifle, which by all rights shouldn't even fire accurately beyond 50 meters, was performing with impossible precision. When the buzzer sounded again, Rachel had fired all 10 rounds. The target system displayed her results on the overhead screen. 10 shots, 10 hits, all within the 10 ring, with a grouping tighter than any competitor had achieved that day. Williams stared at the electronic scoring system in disbelief. It showed Rachel compensating for a 3.7-inch drift, adjusting in real time, without scope modifications, using a weapon that maintenance had condemned as beyond repair. The laughter had died completely now. Veterans in the crowd exchanged knowing glances. This wasn't luck or chance. They were witnessing the difference between trained skill and something far beyond. The kind of shooting that came from having your life depend on each pull of the trigger. Day after day, in places no one talked about, the scoreboard displayed Rachel Thompson's results with unmistakable clarity. 10 shots, 10 bullseyes, all within a half-inch grouping that formed a single ragged hole in the target's center. The laughter that had filled the Fort Benning rifle range moments earlier evaporated, replaced by "That's impossible," someone whispered, the words carrying across the now quiet range. The Special Operations Grade tracking system flashed detailed analytics on the overhead screens. Rachel was compensating for a 3.7-inch drift at 100 meters in real time, without making a single scope adjustment on her battered M4. The maintenance clerk's trembling hands had somehow delivered what the electronic systems confirmed was near-perfect marksmanship. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez stared at the display, his jaw clenched tight. He grabbed the range officer's binoculars, refusing to believe what the system showed. Williams handed them over without comment, his expression thoughtful as Marcus examined the target. "She must have gotten lucky," Madison Hayes muttered. her smartphone now hanging forgotten at her side instead of live streaming the expected humiliation. Master Sergeant Harrison shook his head from his position on the observation deck. "That's not luck," he said quietly to Colonel Patterson. "Look at her timing." The veteran pointed toward Rachel, who stood calmly at her station. "She's timing each shot between tremors, coordinating with her heartbeat. That's advanced tactical breathing." Down on the range, Rachel methodically ejected her empty magazine and secured her weapon. Her movements were precise despite the visible shaking in her hands. The damaged rifle that had drawn mockery now commanded a different kind of attention. Several older veterans in the crowd exchanged knowing glances. One leaned toward his companion. "I've only seen shooting like that in—" He stopped himself, lowering his voice further. "You know where." The Rangers who had been jeering earlier now stood in uncomfortable silence. Private Elena watched with undisguised admiration as Rachel stepped back from her firing position. The broken weapon held with unexpected reverence. The barrel's warped. A weapons specialist in the crowd explained to those nearby. "That grouping shouldn't be physically possible with that equipment. She's calculating bullet trajectory deviations in her head." Marcus turned to his squad, his earlier confidence shattered. "Just a fluke," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "The next round will expose her." Colonel Patterson studied Rachel's calm demeanor with growing interest. The maintenance clerk's service record, with its suspicious redactions, suddenly seemed far more significant. He made a note on his tablet, flagging her file for immediate review. As Rachel took a sip from her water bottle, her eyes briefly met those of Williams. The range officer gave her an almost imperceptible nod of professional respect. The trembling woman had just demonstrated a level of skill that belonged to an entirely different category of warrior. "Rapid-fire round," Williams announced, his voice carrying across the now hushed range. 30 rounds, 30 seconds, with mandatory magazine changes. Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward, desperate to regain his footing after Rachel's shocking performance in precision shooting. "Beginner's luck," he sneered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see how maintenance handles speed drills." But the crowd's attention had shifted. Veterans leaned forward, their expressions intent. Master Sergeant Harrison adjusted his position for a better view, while Colonel Patterson made a quiet call on his phone. Rachel Thompson stood motionless at her station, eyes forward, the broken M4 carbine held with a familiarity that seemed at odds with her trembling hands. She arranged 3 magazines on her shooting mat, positioning them with methodical precision rather than random placement. "Shooters ready?" Williams called. The range officer's countdown barely finished before the range erupted in gunfire. The Rangers moved with practiced efficiency, their weapons chattering in controlled bursts. Marcus fired with aggressive precision, his movements textbook perfect as he dropped empty magazines and slammed in fresh ones. Rachel's approach was entirely different. She waited a full second after the buzzer, took a deep breath, and then transformed. Her trembling hands became a blur of controlled motion. She fired in a rhythm that incorporated her tremor, shooting between the shakes, using the natural pause in her neurological condition. Her first magazine emptied in 9 seconds flat. The transition to her second was so fluid that several observers missed it entirely. No wasted motion, no fumbling, just the practiced economy of someone who had performed magazine changes under far more desperate circumstances than a competition. "Look at her target placement," Elena whispered to a fellow recruit. "She's not just hitting center mass, she's creating tactical groupings." Indeed, Rachel's shots formed perfect triangles on each target, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, the kind of shooting pattern taught only to elite operators, executed with a precision that spoke of thousands of hours of muscle memory. By the time she slammed in her 3rd magazine, even Marcus had paused to watch. Rachel's final 10 rounds disappeared in a controlled cascade, each one finding its mark with devastating placement. When the buzzer sounded, she lowered her weapon and stepped back, her face betraying no emotion. The scoring system confirmed what everyone had witnessed. 30 hits, 30 targets, perfect tactical placement. Not just competition shooting, but combat shooting. The difference is clear as day to anyone who had seen real action. "That's not maintenance division training," Harrison murmured to Patterson. "That's something else entirely." Rachel stood quietly, her trembling hands now visible again as she waited for the next round, seemingly oblivious to the stunned silence that had fallen over the once mocking crowd. Rachel squeezed the trigger with mathematical precision, her body working in harmony with the tremor that others had mocked. 30 rounds erupted from her battered M4, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. The pattern wasn't random. Close targets received precise headshots, while distant silhouettes were disabled with strategic placement to major muscle groups and joints. The crowd fell silent. Where jeers and laughter had echoed moments before, now only the sound of brass casings hitting the ground could be heard. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez stood motionless, his jaw slightly slack as he watched the maintenance clerk systematically destroy every expectation he'd established. "That's impossible," Madison whispered, her phone still recording but forgotten in her hand. The live-streamed comments exploded with disbelief as viewers witnessed what the Rangers themselves couldn't process. Several veterans in the audience exchanged knowing glances. A retired master sergeant pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen as he texted a contact at the Pentagon. "Ghost pattern at Benning, confirm identity." Another former special operator was already making a call, stepping away from the crowd, speaking in hushed tones about signature groupings and Kandahar techniques. Williams approached the scoring station, checking the results multiple times as if the computer must be malfunctioning. The maintenance clerk had achieved what elite shooters trained years to accomplish, with a weapon that should have failed after the first round. "That's not maintenance division shooting," John Harrison muttered to Colonel Patterson. "That's someone who's put rounds downrange when it mattered, when lives depended on it." Rachel lowered her rifle, her trembling hands returning now that the shooting had stopped. She stepped back from the firing line without celebration or acknowledgement, as if the extraordinary performance was merely routine. The Rangers who had gathered to mock her now stood in uncomfortable silence. Their confidence, built on years of elite training and status, had been shattered in less than 30 seconds by a woman they'd dismissed as weak and incompetent. A former instructor from Quantico studied Rachel's stance as she moved away from the line. "That's not standard military," he said quietly to the officer beside him. "That's something else, something they don't teach in any program I know of." Colonel Patterson watched Rachel carefully, his tablet displaying her heavily redacted service record. The gaps in her file suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't administrative errors, but deliberate omissions. The small woman with the trembling hands and broken rifle carried combat experience from operations that officially never existed, under instructors whose names never appeared on any roster. The firing range fell into an uneasy silence during the break. Where laughter and jeers had filled the air just an hour before, now hushed whispers and sidelong glances dominated the atmosphere. Rachel Thompson stood alone, methodically cleaning her battered rifle with steady focus despite her trembling hands. Soldiers who had previously crowded around Marcus Rodriguez now kept their distance from both competitors. Veterans approached Rachel cautiously, their body language revealing a newfound respect tinged with apprehension. One retired sergeant major nodded silently as he passed her, a gesture that spoke volumes in military circles. Colonel Robert Patterson stood on the observation deck, phone pressed to his ear, his expression growing increasingly troubled. The file on his tablet displayed Rachel's service record, a document riddled with black redaction bars and classified markers. Where most soldiers had detailed assignment histories, Rachel's contained mysterious gaps spanning years, operations with code names instead of locations, and commendations without explanations. "That's not possible," the colonel muttered, glancing down at the maintenance clerk. "How does someone with that background end up fixing equipment?" Nearby, Master Sergeant Harrison approached Madison Hayes, who had stopped live streaming and now stared at Rachel with undisguised confusion. "You might want to delete that video," Harrison suggested quietly. "Why?" the female ranger asked, still clutching her smartphone. "Because some things aren't meant for public consumption," he replied, nodding toward Rachel. "Those tremors aren't from nervousness." Indeed, the military-grade brace on Rachel's wrist was now recognized by several medical personnel present as part of an advanced neuroplasticity therapy program. The experimental treatment was reserved for soldiers who had endured extreme physical trauma, the kind that came from operations no one discussed openly. Elena Rodriguez brought Rachel a bottle of water, watching with curiosity as the older woman swallowed 2 pills from a small container. "Are you okay?" the young private asked. Rachel offered a thin smile. "The tremors get worse when the medication wears off." "From an injury?" "From surviving," Rachel answered simply, her eyes momentarily distant. Across the range, Marcus paced nervously, his confidence visibly shaken. His squad members stood apart from him now, their earlier mockery replaced by uncomfortable silence. The Rangers' usual dominance of the competition space had evaporated, leaving them uncertain in this new reality where a maintenance clerk with damaged nerves outshot them with a condemned weapon. Williams approached Rachel with newfound deference. "Next round begins in 5 minutes, ma'am." The "ma'am" were before he had barely acknowledged her, told everyone within earshot that something fundamental had changed. The woman they had laughed at was someone else entirely, someone whose broken body had endured what most couldn't imagine, and whose trembling hands spoke not of weakness, but of extraordinary resilience. Marcus Rodriguez approached Rachel with hesitation in his step, a stark contrast to his earlier swagger. The staff sergeant's eyes darted between her and the battered M4 carbine that had just performed impossibly well. "That weapon is a safety hazard," he said, voice lacking its previous authority. "The barrel could fragment under pressure. I'm going to have to file a complaint with range safety." Rachel Thompson looked up at him, her hands still trembling from nerve damage, but her eyes were utterly still. There was something in her gaze, a cold, calculating assessment that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. It wasn't anger or resentment, but something far more unsettling, the quiet, patient evaluation of a predator. "Do what you need to do, Sergeant," she replied softly, her voice carrying just enough edge to make his skin prickle. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it again, then retreated without another word. His authority had evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. Across the range, clusters of officers and veterans huddled together, their voices low but urgent. Colonel Patterson stood with Master Sergeant Harrison, both men examining a tablet with furrowed brows. "That shooting pattern," Harrison muttered. "I've only seen it once before, in classified footage from Kandahar." Patterson nodded grimly. "Her service record has more black ink than text. 3 years, completely redacted." Nearby, Captain Kim was on her phone, speaking in hushed tones while keeping her eyes fixed on Rachel. "Yes, sir, that's correct. Thompson, Maintenance Division. I need everything you have." The crowd that had gathered to mock Rachel now maintained a respectful distance. Their derision transformed into uneasy speculation. Veterans exchanged knowing glances, recognizing the hallmarks of specialized training that went far beyond standard military protocols. Private Elena Rodriguez approached Rachel with 2 bottles of water, offering one with a tentative smile. "That was incredible," she said, awe evident in her voice. Rachel accepted the water with a nod. Her trembling hands struggled momentarily with the cap before managing to twist it open. "They're all talking about you now," Elena continued, glancing around. "Nobody's laughing anymore." "That was never the point," Rachel replied, taking a careful sip. Sergeant Hayes, who had been live-streaming Rachel's humiliation earlier, now stood awkwardly to the side, her smartphone lowered. The atmosphere had shifted palpably, from a carnival of mockery to something approaching reverence mixed with fear. As the break continued, whispers circulated through the crowd like electricity. Who was this maintenance clerk really? What classified operations had those trembling hands been part of? And why was she here, with a broken rifle, allowing herself to be ridiculed by those who couldn't begin to understand what she had survived? The moving target phase began with a mechanical whir as the range's advanced system activated. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez and his Rangers approached their stations with renewed determination, their earlier cockiness replaced by grim focus. They needed redemption. Moving targets, 30 seconds, multiple vectors, Range Officer Williams announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed field. Marcus fired first, his groupings tight and professional. Each Ranger followed suit, hitting 80 to 90% of their targets, an impressive display that would normally draw applause. But all eyes had shifted to Lane 7, where Rachel Thompson stood motionless, the battered M4 held loosely in her trembling hands. When the buzzer sounded for her turn, something changed. Her tremors didn't disappear, but seemed to integrate into her shooting rhythm. Rachel's first shot cracked before her target had fully emerged from behind a barrier. The bullet struck dead center, as if the target had moved into the bullet's path rather than the other way around. Master Sergeant Harrison leaned forward on the observation deck. "She's shooting where they'll be, not where they are," he muttered to Colonel Patterson. Rachel continued firing with uncanny precision. While the Rangers had tracked their targets before shooting, she operated on a different level entirely, firing at empty spaces that targets would occupy fractions of a second later. Her broken rifle seemed to defy physics, compensating for wind variables that should have made such accuracy impossible. "That's not standard military training," Patterson said quietly. "That's something else." 3 unmarked government vehicles pulled up at the far end of the range. Men and women in civilian clothes emerged, their posture and watchful eyes betraying their military background. They observed in silence, communicating only through subtle glances and nods. Elena Rodriguez, watching from the sidelines, noticed how Rachel's breathing synchronized with her shots, inhaling between targets, firing at the precise moment between heartbeats. The maintenance clerk's eyes never blinked, never wavered. When the final target appeared, a small drone zigzagging at 30 miles per hour, Rachel tracked it for half a second before firing 3 rapid shots. The first disabled its right stabilizer, the second its left, and the third struck its center mass as it began to fall. One of the observers in civilian clothes whispered into a secure phone, "Confirm Ghost 01 operational status. Skill set intact, despite neurological damage." Rachel set her rifle down gently, her hands resuming their constant tremor as she stepped back from the firing line. The crowd had gone eerily silent. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, his pride shattered by Rachel's flawless performance, stalked toward her with barely contained fury. His muscular frame tensed as he approached the small woman who had just humiliated Fort Benning's elite. "Shooting's one thing," Marcus announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "But Rangers are complete warriors. Let's see how you handle yourself without that piece of junk." He gestured to the battered rifle now resting on the shooting mat. Rachel Thompson looked at him with those unnervingly calm eyes. Her hands trembled visibly at her sides, the same tremor everyone had mocked earlier. She gave a single measured nod. "This isn't regulation," Williams called out, stepping forward with concern etched on his face. "It's fine," Rachel said quietly. "I accept." The assembled soldiers formed a loose circle as Marcus removed his outer gear, flexing his shoulders. The Ranger's confidence had returned, fueled by desperation to reclaim some shred of dignity. Elena watched from the edge of the circle, her young face tight with worry. "Just a friendly demonstration," Marcus announced, though his tone suggested otherwise. Rachel simply stood there, her posture relaxed, despite the tremor in her hands. When Marcus lunged forward with a textbook takedown attempt, the maintenance clerk sidestepped with minimal movement. Her counter was so subtle, many missed it. A slight shift of weight, a redirection of momento that sent the larger man stumbling. Marcus recovered quickly, his face darkening. He attacked again, this time with a combination that would have overwhelmed most opponents. Rachel's response was clinical and efficient. No wasted motion, no flashy techniques, just devastatingly effective counters that left the Ranger off balance and increasingly frustrated. "She's not even trying," Harrison muttered to Patterson from their vantage point. During the third exchange, Marcus grabbed Rachel's uniform shirt in desperation. The fabric tore with a loud rip, exposing her upper shoulder and part of her back. The crowd gasped collectively. There, etched permanently in her skin, was an intricate eagle tattoo, wings spread in attack position, talons extended. Each feather bore small initials, and beneath the majestic bird were the words, "Death from Above" and "Ghost Squadron, Nunquam Oblitus." Marcus froze, his face draining of color as recognition dawned. Several veterans in the crowd took involuntary steps backward. Madison lowered her phone, live stream forgotten. "You're the—" Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. Rachel calmly adjusted what remained of her torn shirt, her trembling hands momentarily steady. "We're done here," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the now silent range. Colonel Patterson stepped forward, his expression grave as he surveyed the stunned faces surrounding them. The secret Rachel Thompson had carried beneath her maintenance coveralls was now exposed for all to see, and with it, everything changed. A hush fell over the range as the eagle tattoo became visible to everyone. The intricate design, each feather marked with initials, accompanied by "Death from Above" and "Ghost Squadron, Nunquam Oblitus," told a story that left even the most hardened Rangers speechless. Colonel Robert Patterson stepped forward, his normally stoic face betraying rare emotion. He cleared his throat and addressed the stunned crowd. "What you're seeing is the emblem of Ghost Squadron," the colonel announced, his voice carrying across the now silent range. "And the woman you've been mocking is Master Sergeant Rachel Thompson, call sign Ghost 01, the sole survivor of Operation Blackout." Murmurs rippled through the spectators. Several veterans snapped to attention, recognizing a name spoken only in whispers among special operations communities. 127 confirmed kills, 3 distinguished service crosses, numerous classified medals I'm not at liberty to discuss, Patterson continued. Ghost Squadron was deployed to extract your brothers in arms when conventional rescue was deemed impossible. Rachel stood motionless, her trembling hands now contextualized not as weakness, but as the price of extraordinary sacrifice. The Master Sergeant's eyes remained fixed on a distant point, as if seeing ghosts only she could perceive. The Rangers of Outpost Delta would have been executed if not for Ghost Squadron's intervention, Patterson explained. 14 operators gave their lives so 23 Rangers could come home. Master Sergeant Thompson was the only survivor, sustaining catastrophic nerve damage during the extraction. Marcus stared at the ground, the weight of his ignorance crushing him. Madison had stopped filming, her smartphone hanging limply at her side. "Every name tattooed on those feathers represents a ghost who never returned," the colonel said, his voice softening. "The tremor you mocked is the result of torture she endured while ensuring the extraction team's escape. The maintenance clerk's identity, carefully constructed for her undercover assignment, had shattered completely. In its place stood a legend, broken in body but undefeated in spirit. The rifle," John Harrison spoke up from the observation deck, was Staff Sergeant Michael Chen's, Ghost '04, her spotter. Rachel nodded once, the only acknowledgement she would give. The crowd remained frozen, processing the revelation that they had spent the day ridiculing one of the most decorated operators in recent military history. The Rangers, who had been loudest in their mockery, now looked physically ill, understanding that their lives had been purchased with the blood of warriors they'd never known existed. Ghost Squadron died so the Rangers could live, Patterson concluded. Remember that the next time you judge someone by their appearance. The crowd fell silent as Captain Sarah Kim stepped forward, her face grim with purpose. She carried a tablet displaying financial transactions and encrypted communications that told a damning story. These records prove beyond doubt that the ambush that killed Ghost Squadron was facilitated by leaks from within our ranks, Sarah announced, her voice carrying across the now silent range. We've traced payments of $50,000 each to accounts belonging to Corporal Derek Chen and Specialist Tyler Brooks. The two men, standing among Marcus's squad, went pale. Military police materialized from the edges of the crowd, moving with practiced efficiency to secure them before they could react. For 18 months, I've been hunting the people responsible for my team's deaths, Rachel said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. When intelligence suggested the leak came from Fort Benning, I requested this transfer to maintenance, the perfect cover to move freely and access records without suspicion. Colonel Patterson nodded solemnly. Master Sergeant Thompson's undercover operation was sanctioned at the highest levels. The broken rifle, the tremors, all part of her cover, though the nerve damage is unfortunately real, sustained during her escape from Operation Blackout. Rachel's eyes locked with Marcus. Your unit was scheduled for the mission originally. When it was reassigned to Ghost Squadron, someone wasn't happy. Chen and Brooks sold our insertion coordinates for money, thinking they were just helping someone make a point about Ranger superiority. The military police cuffed the two men who offered no resistance, their faces masks of defeated recognition. 7 good soldiers died because of their betrayal, Rachel continued, her voice hardening. I survived by pure chance, pinned under my spotter's body for 26 hours before extraction arrived. The Rangers who had mocked her earlier now stood with heads bowed, the weight of their disrespect crushing in light of the truth. Marcus stepped away from his disgraced teammates, visibly shaken. They told everyone I was just a clerk with delusions of grandeur, Rachel said, addressing the crowd. They spread rumors about my tremors, claiming I was unfit for service, all while knowing exactly who I was and what I'd survived. Captain Kim approached Rachel, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Justice doesn't bring back the dead, but it honors their sacrifice. As the military police led Chen and Brooks away, their former comrades stepped aside, creating distance between themselves and the traitors. The remaining Rangers exchanged glances of shock and shame, processing how thoroughly they had misjudged the woman they'd ridiculed. Rachel watched them go, her mission of justice finally complete. The broken rifle in her hands, the symbol of her supposed incompetence, now represented something entirely different, the lengths she would go to honor her fallen brothers and sisters. The crowd held its collective breath as the final challenge was announced. 5 combat-ready drones, programmed with evasive maneuvers that even the best marksmen struggled to track, would be released simultaneously. These weren't standard targets. They were military-grade aerial devices designed to test the limits of human reaction time. Rachel Thompson stood at her lane, her trembling hands momentarily stilled as Private Elena approached and draped her jacket over the maintenance clerk's shoulders. For luck, Elena whispered, her eyes reflecting admiration where mockery had once lived. Rachel nodded, the weight of the garment familiar against her shoulders. She raised her battered M4, the duct tape catching sunlight as she settled into position. The weapon, condemned by standards, but resurrected through her expertise, became an extension of her being. Drones, her trembling hands became perfectly still at the moment of truth, her breathing synchronized with an internal rhythm only she could hear. 5 shots cracked through the air in rapid succession, each finding its mark with devastating precision. The timer froze, 11.7 seconds. Silence descended, broken only by the soft thud of the fallen drones hitting the earth. The scoreboard confirmed what seemed impossible. 5 perfect hits, a new record that shattered all previous benchmarks. Colonel Patterson stepped forward, his face solemn. Master Sergeant Thompson has set a new Fort Benning record. Rachel lowered her weapon and faced the assembled soldiers. Her voice, rarely heard until now, carried across the range with quiet authority. Ghost Squadron wasn't just a team. They were my family. She gestured toward the fallen drones. Each shot today was for one of them. For Captain Michael Davis, who died covering our extraction. For Lieutenant James Wilson, who took 3 bullets meant for me. Her gaze swept across the silent crowd, lingering on the Rangers who had mocked her. Never judge a soldier by their appearance or their station. The person cleaning your barracks might have saved your life in ways you'll never know. She handed Elena back her jacket with a nod of thanks, then walked away, her mission of justice and remembrance complete. The crowd parted before her, heads bowing in respect where once there had been only derision. Behind her, the broken rifle, like its owner, had proven that damaged things often fly truest of all. 2 days after the competition, Rachel Thompson returned to her duties in the maintenance shop. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she methodically repaired equipment, her hands still trembling but moving with practiced precision. Most of the base personnel gave her a respectful berth now, their whispers following her through the corridors. The door creaked open, revealing Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez. His posture had changed, shoulders less squared, eyes downcast. Rachel continued working, acknowledging him with only a slight nod. "I came to apologize," Marcus said, his voice lacking its former bravado, "and to ask something." Rachel set down her tools, wiping grease from her fingers. "I'm listening. How do I honor what your team did, what they sacrificed?" His question hung in the air between them. The maintenance clerk studied him for a long moment. "Become the soldier they died to save," she finally answered. "Lead with humility. Protect the weak. Remember that strength isn't always visible." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard before offering a crisp salute and departing. The story of the competition spread through Fort Benning like wildfire, transforming into something almost mythical. Private Elena Rodriguez found herself surrounded by curious recruits during meals, everyone eager for details about the woman who had shattered expectations. Colonel Patterson ensured the official record reflected Rachel's true achievements, though many details remained classified. In the barracks, Sergeant Madison Hayes deleted her live-stream footage, the mockery now a source of shame rather than entertainment. The remaining Rangers in Marcus's unit underwent additional security screening, their training now including lessons on respecting all personnel, regardless of appearance or position. Rachel continued taking her medication each morning, the tremors a permanent reminder of what she'd endured. She maintained her routine, arriving early, working. Yet something had shifted. Occasionally, Williams would invite her to assist with range training. Sometimes, Elena would join her for coffee in the commissary. 1 week after the competition, Rachel returned to her quarters to find an encrypted message on her military tablet. Other ghosts survived, coordinates attached. Confirm receipt. She stared at the screen, memories flooding back, faces of teammates she'd believed lost forever, missions that existed in no official record, bonds forged in darkness. Her trembling finger hovered over the confirmation button. Outside her window, a hawk soared across the Georgia sky, its wings catching the evening light. Rachel watched its flight, graceful despite a visibly damaged wing. She smiled faintly, finding peace in the realization that broken things, whether people, rifles, or wings, often flew truest of all. She pressed confirm.